to another episode of EQ Unlocked. And today we're going to talk about two systems. We're going to talk about the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. So, two systems, one life. Why your nervous system controls everything. Think they have a mindset problem. They don't. They actually have a nervous system problem because if your body is in survival mode, you don't get access to your best thinking. And so, long story short, that is the problem with a lot of circumstances in life. You know, one of the things I really always try and drive home is that a stressed brain can't think. So if your body is stressed out and you're going through some things or whatever the case might be, your brain is not thinking at its best. It's just not. It can't because that's not the way it was designed. So today we're going to break down the two systems running your life. Whether you're aware of them or not, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. That's what we're going to look at. So, you know, as I was just saying, your nervous system has two primary modes. Sympathetic, which is activation. It's the fight, flight, the pressure, urgency. And then the parasympathetic nervous system, which equals regulation, calm, recovery, and safety. And the interesting thing is this isn't psychological. This is biological. So here's the problem. Most people are trying to think clearly, but their body is in a state that's designed for survival. So I don't know about you. I don't know about you, but there's been several times in my life where I was trying to do something that required peace and calmness while my body was highly activated. And that never worked out for me. That never worked out for me. And so while I might have completed the task, I might have actually got it done. It was definitely done with less efficiency and less quality than what I was capable of. But that was because I was running off a system that was not functioning at its best, to say the least. And actually, the system was functioning just how it was designed to function, but I didn't know the difference at the time, and so I didn't wasn't able to produce my best work. So let's break it down. I want you to just take a minute and imagine or go back in your mind to a time in life where something really scary or bad happened. And I don't want you to do anything but go to this place in your mind. Try and think about the colors that you saw. Try and think about the smells that you smelled. Try and think about, you know, whatever details you can think about around that situation that allow you to be there safely. Okay. So what actually happens is in this moment, your heart rate is increasing. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your vision narrows and your brain prioritizes speed over accuracy. And so why is that? Let's look at just these things real quick and ask why is that? Your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shallow, your vision narrows, your brain prioritizes speed over recovery, or excuse me, speed over accuracy. Why is that? Because your brain is wired to survive. And so when you run into a situation that is scary, that is bad, well, your brain is going to survive. It is going to make sure that you survive. The problem is that so many of us live in this state where we don't even see this as abnormal. This is our normal way of functioning. And so if it's our normal way of functioning, of course, we're not going to see it as a big scary thing because that's our norm. And so this is where we overreact. This is where we snap at people. This is where we make impulsive decisions. This is where we misread situations. And here's the truth that most people don't want to hear. You're not choosing these behaviors. They're being driven by your state. And so that means you have even less control than what you thought you had, right? And that's really scary. That's really, really scary. But that is the truth, nevertheless. And so, but where does control actually exist? Well, that's in the parasympathetic system. Your breathing slows down, your heart rate stabilizes, your thinking actually opens up, your awareness actually increases. We can compare these two things, right? Imagine when you're having a conversation with your mate and everything is just calm and you're just having a conversation. You're talking about the issue, you're discussing the problem, you're finding a solution, right? And you guys are just actively communicating. How does that feel in your body? It just feels good, right? It feels, especially after you finish the conversation and get to where you want to be, right? After you finish the conversation, you get to where you want to be. Progress has been made. Something has been achieved, and so that's really good. And so you're calm. You're not looking for the flaws. You're not looking for the holes in their argument. You're not looking for anything negative, right? But let's flip the coin. What about that conversation with your mate when you're arguing, when you're yelling, when tensions are high, when things are rough? What does that look like? Well, your heart rate is increasing. You might start getting a little bit louder, right? You might be start you might start trying to prove your point rather than hear their side of the situation. You might stop listening altogether. And so this same situation plays out day after day after day. And if you're not aware of it, you have no control over it, right? Because you're going to think this is just the way things go. And that's a really crappy place to be. And so, how do you feel when someone actually listens to you? How do you feel when somebody actually takes the time to think about the words you've chosen to share? How do you feel when somebody actually chooses to make the problem right? Not react, but they choose to make the problem right. This is why I say regulation is not control, it's access. And so this happens literally all the time, every day, all day. It happens. And so often we don't even recognize it. And so, but when we start to recognize it, when we start to gain awareness, our whole life begins to shift. And so then the question becomes is why do people stay stuck? Well, here's the truth. Here's why people get trapped. They try to solve sympathetic problems with cognitive tools. Just think positive, just calm down, just communicate better. It doesn't work like that because cognition, well, that comes after regulation. The truth of the matter is that when you're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, well, you can't just communicate better. You can't just calm down. You can't just think positive. It requires your body to relax in itself. You know, recently I had a situation and there was a young lady and she had brought me a sandwich, a sandwich and some chips. That was it. That was what she brought me, right? And while I really appreciated the gesture, what I realized is something in my body was activated. And I asked myself, I'm like, well, why would this activate you? Why? What in the world? Why would in the world does somebody bringing you a sandwich and some chips be activating to you? Well, the reality was is that it was activating to me because, well, it was activating to me because I realized how off all my other relationships had been, how little I was willing to accept, how when I look back at my past relationships, they didn't even meet the minimal standard of what I would accept today. And so, but again, that was awareness, right? That was that was an indication that something was off in my nervous system. And it wasn't off because something was bad. It was off because it was different than my old wiring had taught me. So if the nervous system isn't settled, awareness is limited. And if awareness is limited, your choices, well, they're going to reflect that. And that's just the truth. So like I said, I gave the example of the sandwich, and so this shows up everywhere in relationships. You're not actually arguing about the issue. You're both activated. You know, at work, performance drops under pressure because not because of skill, but because of your state in your own mind. Overthinking is often just unregulated activation. So when we take time to really sit down and think about it, right? The question isn't, what should I do? The question is, what state am I in? And so by asking that question and really giving it an honest evaluation, we can get to a state where we can find the answer. And so it takes time to do this. It takes time to develop these skills. But if you put time in, if you invest time in yourself, you'll get to the solution that you need. You'll get to a solution that improves your life. But that simple question, what state am I in? Rather than what should I do? Well, that opens up doors, a possibility that you may not currently have access to. So here's the shift. Stop trying to fix the behavior first. Start regulating your state. Because when the state changes, awareness increases, choices improve, behaviors stabilize, and that's the hierarchy. Regulation, awareness, choice. And so, we could go into this for days, frankly. I could go into this for days, but I, the reality of it is that when we respond from this activated state, nothing really works out the way we want it to because we're not making choices with our cognitive thinking. Our fight, flight, or freeze responses, those choices are what's running the show. And so it's really amazing for me anyway, as I sat down and I looked at my life and I asked this question. I said to myself, I said, well, how often did this fight, flight, or freeze direct my decisions? How often did that happen? How often did this fight, flight, or freeze make direct the decisions in my brain? And once I really analyzed it, once I really sat down and really started looking into it, what I realized was that what I realized is that it was making my decisions a vast majority of the time. But once I calmed down, once I got regulated, my choices became a lot more clear. They became a lot more powerful. They became a lot more intentional. And once they became intentional, well, then they started to improve. And that was something pretty awesome. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday. Yesterday, I had a situation, and in that situation, somebody said something to me, and I felt like I failed. And once I felt like I failed, and I don't mean failed like didn't complete a mission. I mean failed as in I felt like a failure. I realized that my nervous system just that fight, flight, or freeze just hijacked the rest of my behaviors. And truth be told, I ended up sitting there sobbing. I was just sitting there sobbing because I realized for the first time in a very long time how many of my behaviors had been hijacked by a nervous system that I didn't even choose. Now you might be saying to yourself, "Well, Matthew, how can you be talking about emotional intelligence? How can you be talking about all these things and you're sitting there talking about you were sitting there sobbing? How can you sit there and talk about emotional intelligence when you're talking about all the challenges you had or that you have, right?" And the reality of it is that I can talk about these things in this way and I can acknowledge these things in this way because I know the difference between growth and perfection. I know that perfection doesn't exist, but growth can happen continuously. I know that as long as I'm looking for perfection, I'm never going to find it. As long as I can be content and appreciate growth, well, I'll never stop growing. And so, after I got done sobbing, I really sat down and I broke down and analyzed the situation to the best of my ability. And that situation then led into a bad decision and then another bad decision. And after the second bad decision, I said, wait a minute, I'm going down this rabbit hole. Where did this start at? Right. And so by analyzing this rabbit hole, by analyzing this thing, these behaviors, right? That I by analyzing these behaviors that I experienced and were engaging in, that was awareness. And through that awareness, and after I became regulated, obviously, I was able to sit down and calm down, like, okay, well, am I going to stop making bad decisions right now? Or am I just going to continue down this path? Because as soon as I'm regulated and I am aware that I made a bad choice, what, how can I correct this? And so I made that choice. I made a better choice. And when I made that better choice, I felt this weight and this pressure just lift off my shoulders in a way that I can honestly say I had never experienced before. So it wasn't that things were perfect. What it was is that I was making different choices. What it was is that I was making better choices. What it was is that I had control over my own self. I was able to make choices. And that's what all this is about, my friends. And so at the end of the day, you don't need more information. You simply need access to the information you already have. And that access is controlled by your nervous system. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, reactive, or stuck, don't ask, what's wrong with me? Ask, am I regulated? Because that answer will determine everything that follows. So if you want to understand your current baseline, go ahead and over to MatthewFStevens.com and take the regulation assessment. Because once you see your state clearly, you can start changing it. And so again, I appreciate everybody joining me. We are actually going to be starting a new section coming up very soon. Or not a new section, but a new angle with EQ Unlocked. Proud to say I've been doing some interviews with some guests, and these guests are going to be appearing. And so I have some really amazing people coming up on the show. Really, really amazing people. And I feel so fortunate. I feel so blessed to have these people on the show, and I feel so blessed to have the support from all of you. And I just want to say thank you. And I really appreciate you being here. So if you would share this, like, subscribe, do what you do, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you for all the love and support I've received thus far. And thank you for all the support that's coming up. So thank you so much for all of those things. And as always, be amazing, be you.
As this episode comes to a close, take a moment to notice what stood out for you. Emotional intelligence isn't about having all the answers. It's about building awareness, understanding yourself and the people around you, and choosing how you respond, especially when things feel difficult. Growth happens through reflection and practice, not pressure or perfection. If this conversation supported you, consider sharing it with someone who may benefit from it as well. To explore more tools and resources around emotional intelligence and personal development, connect with EQ Unlocked and Knowles. Until next time, remember, better awareness leads to better choices, and better choices lead to a better life. This is EQ Unlocked.